this is one of those great Sundays where the Old Testament reading and the New Testament reading are like clearly related to each other. And we've got these themes of leprosy and being a foreigner or being an outsider in both texts. When I grew up as a kid hearing these stories, leprosy was always depicted. We have these ideas of leprosy where people are excluded from their community and sent off to some island in Hawaii, or some leper colony somewhere, and kept, and then the disease slowly eats away your body, and it's supposed to be gross, which I'm sure is true for people who suffer it. But leprosy is kind of a catch-all phrase in both the Hebrew Scriptures and the Greek New Testament for any kind of skin disease. So it could have been that kind of leprosy, or it could have been, some sort of fungal thing, or, eczema or whatever. Any kind of skin disease kind of qualified there. So just framing it that way. And then in both stories, there's an outsider who is the protagonist outside of the in-group, outside of the people of God group, or the people of God who are in the group that is identified as being the people of God. So in the first story, we have Naaman, and Naaman is a great man. And that says everything you need to know about Naaman. He is a great man. He's a successful general. He's won battles. He's respected. He is valued by his people and by the political establishment. He is powerful, and he has access to wealth. He is a great man. Except that he has one flaw. He's got a skin disease. He has this imperfection that needles at him, that keeps him from really being as fully great as he can be. The other protagonist in this story is a young girl. She's a Jewish slave. In all likelihood, her village, her town was ransacked by Naaman's armies, and she was stolen away from her people at best, and at worst, her family, her parents were probably killed by those soldiers. And so she was taken when she was young and then raised up in his household to be a servant. And it's her voice in this story that sets the thing in motion, because here Naaman is this great man who has access to everything he wants and everything he needs and is valued by all the people except for the fact that he has leprosy. And it rankles him, and she knows this, and she says, "There is a prophet in Israel who can heal you." And her voice, it's the power of her voice that trickles up, probably through Naaman's wife, and it gets to Naaman's ear, and in his desperation, he decides to go to Israel to seek out the prophet of God, just in case he might be healed. Right? And so he goes to his king, and he asks his king to write a letter to the king of Israel, because this is how people of power, get things arranged. They go through the channels of power and, these affairs of state, and hopefully the pressure of the king of Israel would be applied. If they, this king meets that king, then that king will put pressure on the prophet to do the healing that needs to take place for Naaman's benefit. And so Naaman shows up with 10 talents of silver, which is the equivalent of 340 kilograms of silver. So that's about $200,000 worth of silver at today's prices. 6,000 shekels, which is about $13 million in gold. 6,000 shekels of gold, which is $13 million. And then 10 garments, right? And this is back in the day. This is before, the Industrial Revolution and cotton gins and mills, were producing fabric fairly easily. Back in that day, if you gathered cotton or silk or wool, you had to kind of roll it into a yarn or a thread, and then you had to weave it by hand. And so any kind of garment was expensive because it required a lot of human labor in order to make it happen. So 10 garments is quite extravagant in terms of wealth. So here he comes with all of this silver, all of this gold, all of these garments to the king of Israel, and this letter from the king, and he says, "Here is my servant, heal him." And the king of Israel freaks out, right? He's full of fear. because he sees this as a threat. He sees this as undermining his kingdom. And he doesn't believe that there is any healing in Israel to be found. He himself doesn't think this is possible. And so he tears his clothes as a sign of anguish. And Elisha, the prophet in Samaria, hears this. And he sends a message to the king. He's like, why are you tearing your clothes? Send him to me. Let's show him that there is a man of God here, that healing can happen. So Naaman moves with all his chariots and his army, which is also a sign of his strength and his power. He's got his silver, and he shows up at Elisha's house, outside of Elisha's house, and you've got to imagine that he uncovers the gold and the silver so that Elisha can see all that gold and silver and all of these garments, that are being shown by servants. And they're all standing out in front of Elisha's house, waiting for him to come out and do his magic healing. And Elisha doesn't come out. He's like, I'm not going to play your game. I'm not interested in that kind of power. Your sense of propriety and, everything that says how great you are. But I will heal you. So he sends a servant out to him and says, if you want to be healed, go and wash in the river of Jordan 7 times, and you'll be healed. And Naaman is outraged. His sense of pride is offended. How dare he not meet with me? Doesn't he see all my gold? Doesn't he see all my silver? Doesn't he see these 10 garments? Doesn't he know who I am? I thought at least he would come out and praise his God and do his rituals upon me to heal me. And he storms away, with his ego just deeply offended. And it's his servants, again, the voices trickling from below going up, who say, if he'd asked you to do something difficult, would you have done it? Why then, if he asked you to do something simple, why don't you just go do that? And Naaman, to his credit, listens to the voices of those who are less powerful than he trickling up to him. And so he goes down to the Jordan River. And actually, first of all, I should have said, part of his argument against the Jordan River is the Jordan River is not like the Fraser River, right? The Fraser River is bigger than the Jordan River. It's not like the Pitt River. The Pitt River is bigger than the Jordan River. The Jordan River, at its best, is like the Coquitlam River. And then as you go farther down, a lot of that water gets siphoned off for agriculture. So you get down, farther down where, all the tourists go to get baptized in the Jordan River, and it's a muddy ditch. It is literally a muddy ditch with Syria on one side and Israel on the other, and there's machine guns, and it's messy. But, it's not, his sense of, are not the rivers in Damascus better than the rivers here? He has a point. And so here he is going down to the Jordan River, and he gets in the water and he washes himself, and he gets out and dries himself. And then he gets in the water and he washes himself, and then he gets out and he dries himself. And then he gets in the water and he washes himself. And then he gets out and he dries himself. And something happens. He gets in the water and he washes himself that 7th time. And he gets out and he dries himself, and his skin is perfect. Now he is perfect. He doesn't have the flaw anymore. He's this great man without a flaw. But something has changed within him. He had everything he wanted. But there's a deeper shift that's happened for him. He gets out of that water and he offers Elisha the wealth that he's got, and Elisha's like, yeah, no, thank you. I don't need it. And he says, do me a favor. Then Naaman says to Elisha, well, do me a favor. Give me 2 mule loads of dirt, of this dirt of Israel, of the soil of the earth, because I want to take this earth where Yahweh is worshipped back to my place so that I may worship this God. And in the verses after what we read, he says, and you'll have to forgive me because when I go with my king to worship our God, Rimnon, and we make this bow, there's a point where I have to help the king bow. I want Yahweh to know that I'm not bowing to Rimnon, that I want to worship the true God. Something happens for Naaman. Like he's physically healed, but psychologically and emotionally, he's made whole. That same dynamic happens in our gospel text. Jesus is in this liminal space between the Samaria now and Galilee. And since the Naaman story happened, in the Naaman story, that Samaria region was part of Israel. It was the northern kingdom of Israel. But then the Assyrian army came in and took away the elite and then left some of the northern people there, but then intermarried with the Assyrians in that area. And so the Samaritans are kind of cousins to the Jews. They're still Yahweh worshipers. They still worship God. And they still do Torah like the Jews. But they worship at Mount Gerizim. And so there's this conflict, and it's actually even enmity between the Samaritans and the Jewish people as to who's right. And it cuts deep. And they don't associate with each other. And so Jesus goes in this boundary area between the two, this liminal space where those who are lepers, right, who have this flaw, this disease that they can't get rid of, that ostracizes them from other people, that causes them, both Samaritan lepers and Jewish lepers, to come together. And so there's this group of 10 of them, 10 men. And Jesus comes, they hear of Jesus coming along their way, and they cry out to him from a distance in order to protect him. They don't want to make him unclean, so they keep themselves at a distance from him. And they don't want to offend him, and they shout out, Jesus, have mercy on us. And the text says that Jesus saw them. And in the book of Luke, that verb has meaning and weight. Jesus saw them. It's not just he visually saw them, he knew them, he understood them, he saw them. And he said to them, go and show yourselves to the priests. That's all he says. And they don't doubt that. They don't say, hey, can you do more? They say, oh, okay. We'll go and show ourselves to the priests. And so they make their way, because the priests have rituals. I was reading about those rituals in the book of Leviticus. Leviticus 13 and 14. Fascinating reading, believe it or not, about skin diseases and what to do about skin diseases and how to cleanse and be restored from skin diseases. So like what was going to happen, according to Levitical law, to those lepers when they went and showed the priests is that they would have to buy 2 birds and come with a piece of crimson yarn and a bit of cedar. And you would put the cedar into a bowl of water, and then you would kill one of the birds and put the blood of the bird into that water, and you would tie a crimson thread around the other live bird, keep him alive, and dip him in the water, and then sprinkle the leper with the bloody water live bird thing going on, right? There's a ritual that's happening here. And then you would have to kill a lamb and collect the blood of the lamb and smear the blood on the right earlobe, the right thumb, and the right big toe. And then you would take some oil and do the same thing and then put the rest of the oil on top of their head. And then they would be declared clean. Leviticus 14, check it out. Fascinating reading. But that's what Jesus is sending these lepers to do, right? He's sending them to go do this thing. Except that on the way, as they're on the way to do this thing and should be cleansed by the priests and thus be restored to community, because after you had done this ritual, it was to say that you were now acceptable in community. That was the point of that ritual, is that you would now be no longer outcast but received back into the community. They're going on their way, and as they go on their way, they are healed. The skin disease leaves them. Often, this parable is taught as if only one of those guys was thankful. And I think that's a misreading. I cannot imagine the 10 of them walking down this road and all of a sudden being healed, and only one of them being thankful, and the other 9 are like, oh, darn, we got healed. Be careful what you ask for. I think they too were thankful. Of course they were thankful. Of course they were glad. I mean, of course, they were like, wow, right? And they kept walking. Physically, they were made whole. But something happened to the Samaritan guy that was different. It wasn't just physical for him. It went deeper for him. It cut deeper down into the core of his being. And all of a sudden, something wells up in him and he starts praising God. He starts just letting praise flow from his lips, this ebullient overflowing of just wonder and awe. And he is just praising God. And he turns around and he goes towards Jesus and he lays himself at Jesus' feet. He prostrates himself and he thanks Jesus. There is thanksgiving there, but it's more than thanksgiving. And Jesus says, wow, were there not 10 of you? How is it that only one of you was brought into a state of praise? Only one of you praises God. It's not about thanksgiving. It's about letting the goodness of God and that gratitude sink deeper than the surface. And this man let it sink to the core of his very being. And Jesus says to him, go, your faith has made you whole. Now, your NRSV translation says, your faith has made you well, but the Greek word can be translated as whole. And that's how the King James Version translates it. Your faith has made you whole. There's something more profound that's happened here. I think that's important because this day we're talking about Thanksgiving. We're talking about the goodness of our lives and the good things we have. And, scientists tell us that gratitude is good for your health. Just being grateful, just merely being grateful lowers your blood pressure, it lowers your anxiety, it has all these health benefits. Like they do all this kind of studies about gratitude. So just being grateful has this tremendous healing power to keep us whole. So it's great that we have a day or a weekend where we do Thanksgiving. We should be doing it all the time, entering into Eucharist. But it's like, how deep are we going to let that gratitude go? Are we going to let it go as deep as Naaman takes it? Are we going to let it go as deep as the Samaritan leper, take it? That brings us into this state of praise. That's a different kind of integration. That's a different kind of wholeness. I want to talk a little bit about our healing prayer section during the Eucharist. Each Sunday we have 2 people who are there who say healing prayers. And part of the reason why we do that is because someone in our congregation experienced healing through prayer. And she actually had a physical experience of healing through prayer. And that prompted her to want to start this prayer ministry. And so we do that every Sunday to go forward. And you don't have to say a lot. You don't have to do a lot. You could just say, hey, I need prayer. Or you could say, I need prayer for. You could give some context, but you don't even have to give much context. You could just say, hey, I need prayer. And those folks will pray for you. I was astonished. I was talking to somebody this week who is battling cancer. She's part of our congregation. And she was talking with her doctor, and her doctor says, you should be dead. Given all you're dealing with, you should be dead, and you're still alive. And he asked her, are you part of a faith community? And she said, yes. I'm part of a faith community, and they pray for me. This doctor wants to write a paper on her. Because, it was in his best clinical judgment, it was her being part of a faith community where people were praying for her. That was a factor in why she was still alive. True things. Or I'm just offering you what I've heard this week. But that is also the message of these stories, that our deeper healing isn't just about physical healing. Our deeper healing goes all the way down to who we are as spiritual beings. And prayer is perhaps the best context to address that. Amen.